Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on a worm bin with some red wiggler worms in it, and I've got some stats about the system to share with you. But let's point the camera down first so you can see the system, and then I'll bring out the details to share with you. They're now 179 days of age in this particular bin over here, and we've fed them 14 times, but of the 14 times they've been fed, the last 12 feedings have been what I refer to as pocket feedings. So once I get this paper cover off, you'll see what I mean by pocket feedings. I'm just referring to the corners of the bin. My typical method of feeding is down the middle, but this feeding zone indicator here, this coffee filter, shows where we last fed. So the first pocket feeding started in this corner, so there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pocket feedings so far out of the 14 overall feedings. I believe the first 2 feedings would have just been down the middle like usual. And what's a little bit unusual is the pause. The pause between feedings is typically not as great as it is here today. The last check-in was 3 weeks ago. I'm gradually getting caught up on all my systems after being away for a little while. And I think the bins that I've got on the schedule to get checked in on tomorrow are the last of the systems that have not been checked on yet since I returned. All the other ones have been checked in on, but this system here and the ones I'm going to be checking in on tomorrow are the last that are in that 3-week range of not having been checked in on yet. So it's fair to assume that the stuff that we fed them last time over there in that corner, which was watermelon, not even watermelon rinds, but just watermelon minus the rinds, and some coffee. I think there was a banana peel in there, so perhaps we'll see the stem of the banana peel after 3 weeks, but even after 3 weeks that could possibly be close to being finished. So we could definitely use that coffee filter right there as our as supplemental bedding, which we can even use these leaves here, although I like the leaves, you know. Sometimes, since I'm running a little bit low on leaves, I've been making it a practice to preserve the leaves. So why don't we do that here too? I like that idea of keeping the leaves that have survived since the last check-in, keeping them around and covering up with them at the end. There's something so nice about the way the material looks right beneath the leaves when you pull the leaves aside. It's almost as if there's a mulch layer, and what's right beneath the mulch layer is a space where the worms definitely like roaming around. And there's a nice moisture level, even though the only covering on top was a piece of newspaper. There's a fair bit of moisture out here on the surface. So I figured we would check how the last feeding went, but even before proceeding to the next corner to feed them their meal today, which I guess, by the way, is just a little bit more watermelon, except this time it's just watermelon rinds. It's also cantaloupe melon rinds and some more coffee. And the new feeding zone indicator can just be that coffee filter that comes in with the coffee portion. So, like I said, what they got last time was melon, coffee, and a banana peel. So if we find the banana peel stem, that wouldn't be all that surprising. Perhaps we'll bump into other things, like this could just be some of the bedding that we opted to use last time. I don't remember what it was, but just from the look of it, it could possibly have been just some paper which sort of matted up against itself and wasn't able to get consumed just because it was sort of in a clump there. And here, more stuff that appears to have been laid in here with the intention of it being bedding. And this too also appears to me like another coffee filter. So I still haven't seen anything other than stuff that resembles bedding. Oh, here's the stem of the banana. Probably the same banana stem that went in 3 weeks ago, and there ain't a whole lot left to it. You can see that there's even a whole bunch of worms that have crawled down inside of the stem. And the inside of it is, for the most part, hollow. And I don't think that it's got a whole lot left. I can see stuff here too, like this is the outer husk of a mango seed. And that's the sort of thing that probably goes back many, many feedings at this point. So if we do encounter any other leftovers, it's most likely stuff that would go back to previous feedings, many, many feedings ago. It's just that when I bump into a little pile of this sort of mounded up bedding type material, I just can't seem to resist trying to help it along by tearing it apart and not having it in a big clump like that. So I think we're kind of at the point where we can backfill this feeding zone after we've taken a quick glance at how things are proceeding or progressing in it. And things are progressing nicely, if you ask me. I see lots of castings piling up, lots of worms hanging out in there too, and a good bit of moisture, which is probably also part of the reason the worms like hanging out there. I would think that that watermelon they got last time contributed greatly to a nice injection of moisture to that corner. So I'm just going to grab all these little bits and pieces of food and bedding stuff that we encountered along the way and just get it back down there in the hole so that the worms can get back to work on that stuff. And it'll be almost as if we were never even here. Now, I'll admit, my check-ins are pretty intrusive. This here, to me, feels like a chunk of corn cob, a little tiny piece of it. Let's just get that down in there. That must have also been part of that feeding. This, to me, and also feels like more of the same, more corn cob bits. So it always seems to me like if the food that you want worms working on is a little bit beneath the surface, there's a better chance of it seeing worm activity than if it's out on the surface. And even though the outer surface here has got a good bit of moisture and probably saw some decent worm traffic, it does seem to me like just below the surface has got a somewhat better opportunity at getting broken down. So to me that seems like the better place to be. Now, the time span that went between these two corners, that was only 8 days, you know, so I was really planning to be away for quite some time. So, that's the reason I came back in here after only 8 days to feed at that corner last time, knowing that it would be a fair amount of time between then and now. So this only makes this corner 29 days since the last feeding. I don't recall what was fed in that corner, but there is a good number of worms hanging out in that corner. And it did seem like I encountered one or two bits of stuff that resembled food items, little bits and pieces of stuff, but I really didn't want to linger. I just figured we'd really quickly kind of keep to tradition by inspecting each corner before proceeding to today's feeding. So I'm just trying to do that, but not paying a great deal of attention to what's happening in these corners. I mean, the last corner that the first corner that we checked in on, the one that goes back to the last feeding, I figured was worth checking on, even though I kind of knew what to expect there, which was seeing virtually no leftovers of the last feeding. But these other corners, I figured we would just check them out, but for the most part what I'm doing is just aerating, just trying to give the material in those corners a little bit of an air injection by me tilling it up. And then now we're finally at the corner that's going to get fed today. So this is now the 4th time that we're checking in on this corner. This is the beginning of a 4th lap around the system if we continue with these pocket feedings. And I mean, at 179 days of age, it's fair to expect that this system's going to continue for some time before we try to bring it to its end. And here, so far, I don't really see much of anything that resembles leftovers of past feedings. I mean, I think what I saw here was just evidence of having used leaves as bedding, because I see the leaf stems everywhere. And I just didn't really encounter anything that, to me, resembled leftover food bits. Not even any slow composting stuff like corn cob bits or anything like that. Not even any leftover bedding material. So this corner is definitely due for a feeding, but even so, you can see there's a good many worms hanging out in this stuff, despite the fact that there's been nothing fed to this corner in quite some time. So to get this feeding started, we're going to begin with a handful of my prepared bedding, going in as sort of a foundational layer onto which today's food can be sprinkled. And then here's the coffee that they're getting. And like I said, this coffee filter that had been our feeding zone indicator up until now can simply go in here as supplemental bedding too. And then in can go these delicious juicy morsels of sweet melon rinds, and we can even give them a little bit of grit to complement the food. So that's pretty much their feeding, and there's not much left to do other than get things covered up and let these little guys get back to work. I'm definitely trying to see what I could do about preserving the last of my supply of leaves. Last time I went out to replenish my supply of leaves, I noticed how little I had left, so it's part of the reason I've been a little bit stingy with leaves lately. So I think that the stuff that we scraped off the top and preserved was still looking pretty much intact for the most part. So I figured, why not reuse it? It does seem to give the material that's right below it a good shot at hanging on to its moisture content and possibly making it a more hospitable place for worms to come hang out in. And that's even with just a paper covering like what we're using here. A lot of times with a paper only covering, the top surface gets fairly dry, but I guess with the high humidity we've been seeing, most of my systems are having a good bit of moisture held on rather than being lost to evaporation, and I got a feeling that's something that the worms appreciate and enjoy. So I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away here, but I'm not going to keep you around for that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.